All right, Shabbos, say good morning. Let us begin. Beautiful, beautiful daf ahead of us today. Begin by thanking all of our sponsors. Thank our Talmud Torah sponsors for the month of Teves. The daf Yomi shir. In the schus of an alif in the shama of Mr. Milton Martyr Mordechai David ben Rafal HaKohen. To thank the Elbaum Mishpacha for dedicating all the Shurim this month in creation of the yard site of Jerry Elbaum, Yaakov Kapel ben Rav Avram Menachem. Thank our week of learning sponsors, Paul and Kathy Pollack, and the Schus of Rafu Shlema for Harav David HaKohen ben Leah. And thanks our week of learning sponsors, Saeed and Sima Haken, for dedicating the Shurim this week in the Schus of Aliyah for the Neshama of Sima's parents, Miriam Bas Elazar and Yecheskel ben Aga Sela. To thank our Daf Yomi sponsors for today, Evelyn gets in commemoration of the yahrzeit of her son. Yisrael gets Yisrael Yaakov ben Moshe Hillel Zichron Livracha. Also, I will say again, we dedicate all of our learning today is the yahrzeit of Rabbi Price Zichron Livracha, Harav Shlomo Aryeh ben Moshe Zichron Livracha. We hope that in the merit of our Talmud Torah, the Neshama will have an aliyah. All of the Neshamas will have an aliyah. The families a nechama, and all those who require a refuah should have one together with Kol Cholei Yisrael. So, with that, let us begin. So today's daf is Ayin Vav 76. We are picking up Rabosai again. Let's pick up Amri Rabbanim, 3 lines down from the top, 76a. 3 lines down from the 76a. So remember again, just to reorient ourselves a little bit over here. Remember again, we had a fascinating Mishnah. What was the Mishnah? So we had a machlokes. Well, let's start with what we didn't have a machlokes with. Number one, everyone agreed that proactive affirmation ultimately does not work out of a concern of a kiyum betos, little chazara. What about proactive revocation? So that was a machlokes in the Chachamim and Rabbi Eliezer. The Chachamim say it does not work. Rabbi Eliezer says it does work. Okay, Rabbi Eliezer has his kal v'chomer. And both saying, what's his kal v'chomer? Essentially, again, if you could undo a current reality, then you could certainly what? Prevent that reality from ever occurring to begin with. So if a husband has the ability to go ahead and revoke his wife's neder once she made it, he certainly has the ability to block it from ever occurring. Chacham, on the other hand, say, no, this is a pasuk. Isha yikimenu, v'isha yiferenu. If a neder ultimately again comes to be, then or comes to fruition, then you could annul it. But if it never comes to fruition, then ultimately again annulment is impossible. Therefore, proactive revocation is simply impossible. So we'll say the Gemara asks the simple question. According to Eliezer, who says that proactive revocation is possible, what are the mechanics of proactive revocation? 2 possibilities. Possibility 1 is that proactive revocation prevents the neder from ever being chal. It just never takes effect. Possibility number 2 is it takes effect for a moment, and then what? And then is annulled immediately afterwards. What's the nafkamina? Both say the nafkamina, the chazara, nafkamina, atfasa or hatfasa, right? Where somebody wants to piggyback on the neder. Let's say again, the wife says, "I'm a nazira," right? And somebody says, "Gamani." Does that work? Now, normally you could piggyback on someone else's neder. The shayla is, does that work in this particular case? Why? If you hold that halacha lemaisa, the neder is chal for a moment, then hatfasa will work. But if you hold that the neder is not even chal for a moment, then hatvasa will not work. Okay, so we're going back and forth with this. Now, what we ended off with yesterday was this interesting Tosefta, right? In Tosefta, the Tosefta has much more information than our Mishnah. And in the Tosefta, the Rabbanan were pushing back on Rabbi Meir's kal v'chomer from 2 cases. One the mikvah and one the kli. So we saw both of those. I'm not going to review those. We saw both those cases in yesterday's daf. So we'll say, what was the problem? The problem was from the Rabbanon's response to Rabbi Eliezer, it wasn't clear what they felt Rabbi Eliezer's shita was as to the mechanics of proactive revocation. That's where we're picking up. So we'll say 3 lines down from the top, Ayin Vav Amud Aleph. Amri, so as actually kind of in the middle of a sentence. Amri Rabbanon lo kaimi lahon b'tamid Rabbi Eliezer. Sorry. The truth is, the Gemara says, the Rabbanon actually did not really know the sheet of Rabbi Eliezer. Otherwise, I will say again, this is the shaila. We know because Rabbi Eliezer says in the Mishnah that proactive revocation works. What we don't know, what the Rabbanan don't know, is how does it work according to Rabbi Eliezer? Does it work in that the neder is chal for a moment and then it's revoked? Or does it work that proactive revocation prevents the neder from ever being chal at all? So the Gemara says, this is what the Chacham were saying to Rabbi Eliezer. My severe lacha, Rabbi Eliezer, what do you hold? If at the end of the day you hold that the neder is chal, right? It works for a moment. So I was about to say, again, let's just play this out for just a moment, right? So Reuben's married to Rachel. Right? Reuben says, listen, I'm going away. Any nedarim you make now for the next 30 days are batal. Fine. 2 days in, Rachel says, Hareini Nazira. I'm going to be a Nazir. So I'll say, so the Rabbanan say, listen, we hold the whole thing doesn't work. But according to Rabbi Eliezer, so let's analyze this. What's your svar? You say it does work. If you hold that when she says Harini Nazira, we'll say, what happens? It works. In other words, for a moment, she is a Nazira, and then what happens? The proactive revocation comes along and annuls that neder. So then ultimately, again, I will say, the Kli case should ultimately refute it, right? Because ultimately, again, what did they say in the Kli case? They said a person can take a Kli and what I will say, proactively immerse it and say that when this Kli becomes Tameh, the proactive immersion should go ahead and remedy it. So the same way it doesn't work by a Kli, it also won't work by a woman's Nedarim. And if you hold that ultimately, again, the Nedarim is that the neder, in the case of proactive revocation, the neder is not chal at all, to have a mikvah tiyuftech. Then the mikvah case, we'll say, what was the mikvah case? The mikvah case is where a person goes to the mikvah when they are still tahar in order to prevent tumah from ever setting in. So obviously, again, that doesn't work. So therefore, they'll refute Rabbi Eliezer's position from that case. Therefore, I will say, essentially, the Rabbanan themselves are not sure. The same shaila our Gemara has about the mechanics of Rabbi Eliezer's proactive revocation is the same exact shaila that Rabbanan have on Rabbi Eliezer's proactive revocation. No one knows how it works. So what the Rabbanan do is they try to go ahead and refute Rabbi Eliezer on both points. So again, if you hold that the way proactive revocation works is that the neder is chal for a moment and then revoked, I'll refute that from the case of the Kli. What was the case of the Kli? They will say that's a case of a person who takes a utensil that right now is tahar. What does he do? He immerses it in the mikvah and he says what? When this Kli becomes tameh, the proactive immersion should go ahead and remedy the tumah. So we'll say, so just like that doesn't work, so too if you hold the neder as chal for a moment, the revocation can't come and take it away. If you hold, on the other hand, that proactive revocation prevents it from ever setting in, that's the mikveh case. That's the mikveh case where a person proactively immerses himself in order to what? To prevent himself from becoming tameh. The same way that doesn't work, so too again, your model of proactive revocation, which prevents the neder from ever being chal, doesn't work as well. So the Rabbanan effectively in the Tosefta refute Rabbi Eliezer on both accounts. Incredible. So we'll say, so Tashma. Now, by the way, we still don't have an answer to our question. In other words, our core question about what are the mechanics of proactive revocation according to Rabbi Eliezer is still unanswered. So Tashma, let's analyze a bit more. Tashma, Amar lahem Rabbi Eliezer. Rabbi Eliezer said to the Chachamim, Uma zra'im timeim, kevan shezra'im bekarka tahorin. So this is an interesting case. If you have seeds or plants, for that matter, right? Kevan there are timeim. So whatever it is, you have a case of, let's say, a plant or a seed that came in it's detached from the ground, has come in contact with a source of tumah, and now, as a result, is tameh. Now, boss, you do something interesting. What do? You replant that item. What happens when you replant the item? The tumah status goes away. It's halacha. If you replant something, ultimately, again, right? Ultimately, the tumah goes away. Again, we're not gonna delve into these halachas too much. We'll just take the Gemara. Statement. Yeah, if you take a look here, take a look at the rush for just a moment, Rabbi say. Take a look at the rush. The rush is in the wide lines, 3 lines in. Tashma Amalu Rabbi Eliezer Umazraim. Heishiv Lehem Rabbi Eliezer Shematzinu Shedanin Kavachomer Kio Benedarim. I will say Rabbi Eliezer's trying to prove that it's Kavachomer is correct. I will say what's Rabbi Eliezer's Kavachomer? What's Kavachomer? His Kavachomer is if you have the power to change a reality, you certainly have the power to what? Prevent it from ever occurring. That's his point. So he's trying to prove that again. So he says, Daha kaimalon dizroim zeruim enam mekablim tuma lo asi el mehakav chomer umazroim tmeim kevan shezarim bekarka torin. Suppose listen to this. If you take a tame plant or tame seeds, right? So we'll say a simple case, right? So however it became tame, right? The tame plant, tame seeds, and now what do? You replant it. It becomes tar. Kedesanya b'torah skanim minayim l'zorim tmeim shezarim bekarka shein torin shenemar al kol zera zerua asher yizarea taharhu yachal afilu lo shisho. So what I see the idea of Gemara quotes in the pasuk that Allah says if you take something that is tamei and you replant it, ultimately again it becomes tar. It becomes. By the way, what an incredible Musar Haskell. They'll say, what do we say in Tehillim? V'haya ke'etz shasul al palgei mayim. They'll say, what does David HaMelech say about man? What's man's job? Man's job is to make himself like a tree that is planted by rivers of water. The rivers of water in this context, we'll say, are what? Is Torah. What's the goal? The goal is plant yourself in Torah. Why does David HaMelech use that imagery? I always wonder about this. Now, if you look at the Mefarshim on that pasuk, the idea that David HaMelech was trying to convey is that a tree that's planted by a source of water is well nourished. I will say, but it's not just the fact that it's well nourished; it's planted. I will say, what's the difference between something that's planted versus something that's just situated? It's a big distinction. Something that's situated could be what? Easily moved. Something that's planted is really embedded. See, I was saying, the key to successful ruchnius is being planted in something. Right? In other words, that it's not just the pshat that I dabble, I do this sometimes, I don't do this other times. Being planted in something means I'm kavua. Whatever it is. This is a good way. I don't know as well say. Obviously, we do the daf yomi, right? So we're pretty kavua in things. But lamais, it means embedding yourself in something. When you plant yourself, whether it's in your Talmud Torah, in your tefillah, and you make it a kavua part of your life. I'm here. I'm embedded. I'm planted. That's ultimately something that sustains. And I will say, not only that, when you plant yourself in something, you know what it does? It removes tumah. Isn't that incredible? So I will say, if you just take an item that's tameh and you put it next to something, the tumah still remains. But if you take a tameh item and you replant it, ultimately it loses its tumah and regains its former tara. Sometimes my personalistic tree, becomes defiled with bad life choices. How do you deal with that? Replant yourself near the rivers of Torah. If you replant yourself, something amazing happens. All of the tumah goes away. Incredible. Shabbos says, now watch this. So says the Gemara, a person takes zura'im tmeim and he goes ahead and he replants them in the ground. Shabbos says, what's the halacha? Torin. So ziruin va'omdin lo kol shekain. So I'll say all the more so. So now watch this kal v'chomer. Which, by the way, this happens to be true, this kal v'chomer. It says like this. If you take seeds or plants that became tameh and you replant them, so now they lose their tumah status and become tar. So all the more so, items that are still planted, still attached to the ground, aren't mekabel tumah. And I will say, by the way, that is a true statement. Items that are still attached to the ground are not mekabel tumah. So I will say, shma mina. So again, what is Rabbi Eliezer trying to prove? Once again, he's just trying to prove that halacha l'maisa, if you could change a reality, then what? You certainly could prevent it from occurring. And I will say, the fact that he's bringing this kal v'chomer, what do you see from this in terms of how he feels about the mechanics of the Nedarim? Shma mina lo chaylon. You see from here, I will say that what does he hold? That when you have proactive revocation, the neder never takes place to begin with. Now, how do you know that? Was it why? Because what is he comparing the neder to? What is he comparing proactive revocation to? To plants that are still planted in the ground that can never become tameh. That's the comparison. So the same way that something that is attached to the ground cannot become tameh, so to proactive revocation, the neder is not even chal for a moment. Good. So the Gemara said, "V'Rabbanon." But the Gemara said, "V'Rabbanon l'dashi kal v'chomer." They will say, now here's what's interesting. So Rabbi Eliezer's entire position is based on. So I just want to point out, it sounds like that what the Gemara is settling on over here is that in Rabbi Meir's model of proactive revocation, the neder is never chal. The neder is never chal. Okay, so now the Gemara stops on this. Now we'll say, what's interesting is as follows. Rabbi Eliezer's entire position is predicated on a kal v'chomer. Right? Again, once the same kal v'chomer over and over. If you could change the reality of something, you certainly could what? Prevent it from ever occurring. So the Gemara says, do the Rabbanon reject that kal v'chomer? They don't agree with that. For Rabbanon, lo darshi kal v'chomer, do Rabbanon not agree? After all, we see, v'hatanya we learned, interesting case, yochol yimkar adam esbito kishinara. But so you might have thought that a man has the ability to sell his daughter as a maidservant when she is a nara. So remember again, what's a nara? 6-month window, 12 to 12 and 6 months. A father has the right to sell his daughter as a maidservant, right? As a shivcha. Right? So now what's interesting is as follows. What's interesting is you might have thought that a father has the right to sell his daughter even when she's a nara. In other words, let's work backwards. As of what point does a father for sure not have the right to sell his daughter? Bagrus, right? Bogeris. Obviously, I will say, because pretty much once Bagrus comes, he has no rights in her at all, right? So now let's work backwards. So I might have thought that as a nara, remember again, also we've already seen, a nara is this interesting kind of hybrid time where a father still does have some rights in his daughter. So I might have thought he could sell her when she's a nara. So Amrit kal v'chomer. So we say, what's kal v'chomer? So what's kal v'chomer? Mechura kvar yotza. I will say, if a girl was sold as a shivcha, as a ketana, she goes free. Once she becomes a nara, so the Gemara says, so mechura kvar yotza, eina mechura eino din shaloti macher. So we'll say, so again, if she was already sold when she was a ketana, and she goes free as a nara, then certainly what? She cannot be sold as a nara. So we'll say, what do you see from here? They hold this kal v'chomer. In other words, we'll say, so what's this kal v'chomer? In other words, if a change of reality occurs when she's a nara, then certainly the new reality of shivchos does not set in. I will say that's effectively the same kal v'chomer that Rabbi Eliezer is making, and yet in this case over here, everyone is subscribing to that same kal v'chomer, which again, I will say the kal v'chomer is, if you could change a reality, you certainly could prevent it from happening. That was Rabbi Eliezer's kal v'chomer to justify proactive revocation. The Gemara makes it sound like this entire time that the Rabbanon do not hold of that kal v'chomer. Yet Rabbi say, here we see they do. If a girl goes free as a nara, i.e. changing of reality, it certainly prevents the reality of her becoming a shivcha as a nara. So you see that the Rabbanon do subscribe to the kal v'chomer. Rabbi say, Amud Beis, in Ba'al Madarshi kal v'chomer. No, it's true. It's true. In general, the truth is, this is a compelling kal v'chomer. Rabbi say, again, it's a compelling kal v'chomer to say that if you could change a reality, you could certainly prevent it from happening as well. Rabbi say, again, just halachically it's compelling, hashkafically, like we spoke about yesterday, if I could do tshuva, if I could change a reality, then what? Then what do I say? I could certainly abstain from making the mistake to begin with. Right? So it's compelling halachically, it's compelling hashkafically. So let's say, so why don't the Rabbanon agree with Rabbi Eliezer over here? The shiny hacha, the amakra, ishayi kimena, the ishayi ferena. And we'll say it's different over here, because the Rabbanon say, here by Nedarim, it's a pasuk. It's a pasuk. What does the pasuk say? A husband will uphold the neder, a husband will annul the neder. Es sheba lichlal hakem, ba lichlal hafer. It is only a neder that has come to the point where it could be affirmed, that it can also what? Be annulled. As shelo ba lichlal hakem, but if a neder cannot be affirmed, i.e. it has not come into existence, lo ba lichlal hafer, it also cannot be annulled. So we'll say, this is what the Rabbanan said in the Mishnah. The Rabbanan is saying, so we'll say, so to a certain degree, like they're not really arguing with each other, they're talking at each other, not to each other, meaning because Rabbi Eliezer is operating with the kal v'chomer, the Rabbanan will say, Rabbi Eliezer, we love your kal v'chomer. The difference over here is what? The difference over here is what? It's a pasuk. So once it's a pasuk, there's nothing really to argue anymore. So we'll say, by the way, I just want to point out, it's actually two very compelling arguments. Rabbi Eliezer is saying proactive revocation should work because, again, of the kal v'chomer, if you could change a reality, you certainly could prevent it from ever occurring. So if a husband could annul his wife's Nedarim, he certainly should be able to prevent it from ever occurring in the first place. And the Chum saying, it's a pasuk, Ishay Kimena ve'Ishay Feren, and Torah linking the process of revocation to the process of affirmation. Just like affirmation could only be done with a neder that exists, so too revocation or annulment could only be done with a neder that exists. And therefore proactive revocation will not work. So I will say, so bottom line, we're left with a machlokes. Everyone agrees proactive affirmation will not work because of the fear of a kiyum b'taos, or a real concern of kiyum b'taos. So the machlokes about proactive revocation, how do we pass? And so says the Rambam says over here in Hilchos Nedarim, Parak Yud Gimel Halacha Tes. Here it is. Ha'omer le'ishta o lebito, kol nedarim shetaduri mikan va'achav mimakom ploni, harihein kayamen, o harihein mufarin. So we'll see, here's how the Rambam frames the case. Sa'alocha l'maisa, if a person goes ahead, man says to his wife or to his daughter, because either way, whichever way you have the power of revocation, any nedarim you make, right? That you'll make from now until I come back from a certain place. So I'll say, by the way, I just want to point out the reason why these cases are framed as from now until I come back from a certain place is why? Because Lamai said the assumption over here, we're talking about a case where he's not hearing the Nedarim. So what's the case when he's not hearing the Nedarim? Where he's traveling. That's why it's set up like this. But I just want to point out, it doesn't have to be like that. He could also make this same Tanai, even if he's sitting at home. So Lamaisa again, he says, any proactive revocation, proactive affirmation, the Rambam says, Lo Amar Klum. Shabbos said we paskin ultimately like the Chachamim, namely that proactive revocation will not work, and I should say proactive affirmation will not work, but that everyone agrees on, and proactive revocation will not work as well in accordance with the position of the Chachamim. Why not? The Kesef Mishnah quotes the logic of the Chachamim, Ishayi Ferenu, Vishayi Kimenu, Ishayi Kimenu, Vishayi Ferenu. We link the process ultimately again of revocation to affirmation. Just like affirmation could only be done on a neder that exists, so too revocation could only be done on a neder that exists. So both say, Salach l'maisa, pass like the Chachamim, no proactive affirmation, no proactive revocation. Incredible. Says the Mishnah. Both let's go back there. Says the Mishnah. Really interesting sugya. So now both we're going to get into a little bit more of the mechanics of revocation itself, which is really interesting. Hafaras nedarim. So we'll say, so remember again, just to be clear, there's hataras nedarim and hafaras nedarim. Hafaras nedarim specifically refers to the process or to the mechanism of annulment as used by a husband or a father. Okay? So we'll say, so there's a very big difference in this. Why? Because as we're going to see, the ability for a father or a husband, well, let's see right now. Hafaras nedarim, Shabbos says, so the annulment of a neder by a husband or a father, that is kol hayom. That could take place that day. That day. And they will say, what's that day? If you take a look at the Ran, Shabbos say, see the Ran in the short lines there, like right in the middle of the short lines, right where you see the big masnis and the big mishnah. It's a 2, 4, 6, 8, 10. 11 lines up from before it gets wide. So as far as them kol hayom, yom hashmiya. They both say there is a window of annulment that a father or a husband have. What's the window? The day on which they heard the neder. The day on which they heard the neder. So right, hafar stam kol hayom. So the Gemara Mishnah says, yesh, but now say, now understand what does day mean? What does day mean? So we're going to see that the Yom HaShmi refers to the calendar day. The calendar day. Yesh b'davar lahakel ulahachmer. They both say, now the truth is, this comes with a chumrah and it comes with a kula. How so? Ketzad. So Ketzad nadra belele Shabbos yafer belele Shabbos Yom Shabbos achetech shach. So we'll say here's an example. Let's say again, Reuven's married to Rachel, and what does Rachel do? Rachel makes a neder on Friday night. On Friday night. So we'll say, so what's talacha? What's Reuven's window of annulment? All of Shabbos night and all of Shabbos day achetech shach until Matzah Shabbos. Until it gets dark, Matzah Shabbos. Nadra imcha shecha. On the other hand, if let's say again she makes a neder by Shalosh Udis, right? Let's say again late on the day of Shabbos, meitfer ad shelo techshach, shimchash lo hefer ein yachal lahafer. Then he only has the ability to go ahead and annul the neder until when? Until nightfall. So we'll say the idea, the Mishnah is calling this over here that there's a kula and there's a kula in the chumrah. So we'll discuss this. The kula is that you could have up to an entire day to annul it. The chumrah is that what I will say, there could be situations where what? You only have a matter of minutes, right? If she makes the neder very late in the day, you may only have a matter of minutes in which to exercise the power of annulment. Take a look at the Ran again. Lahakil u lahachmir. So the Ran says something very interesting. He says, Lav dafka lahakil. The Ran says, the wording of lahakel and lahachmir is actually the wrong wording, because this isn't the kula and the chumrah. Rather, I will say, what is it? The halo sheikha kula v'chumrah hacha alahachi kamar pamim shezmana meruba pamim shezmana muat. So I will say, the idea the Ran says it's not really a kula and a chumrah. Rather, what is it? It just means that this halacha manifests itself in different ways at different times. So sometimes you'll have a lot of time for revocation. Sometimes you won't have a lot of time for revocation. That's pretty much what it means. La fuke me'es la'es de la'olam zmano shava. Shabbos say this stands in contradistinction. We're going to see an opinion of say that holds that the window for revocation is 24 hours. Now, both say me'es la'es means 24-hour period from the time that you hear the neder. Right, you always have 24 hours. So we'll say the chap in that position is it's consistent. There's always 24 hours. What, according to the Ran, what the Mishnah is trying to highlight over here, it used lashon of lakula and lachumra, but it doesn't really mean lakula and lachumra. Rather, what it means is sometimes you'll have a lot of time for more time. Sometimes you'll have less time. Take a look at the next round for just a moment. Nadra b'leilei Shabbos. So it's interesting. I will say that the Mishnah chooses the example over here of making a neder on Shabbos night. So the Ran writes, "Hu adin b'chol." The truth is, the Mishnah obviously this same halacha applies even if she made a neder by day. So what's the chap over here? V'haydinakit Shabbos milsa agav orchi kamash malon. B'mefirim nedarim b'Shabbos v'afal pi she'enon l'tzorach Shabbos k'yakim mar. So we're going to see, by the way, what the Mishnah is coming to introduce us to is the idea that you could annul nedarim on Shabbos, right? That's going to be more of tomorrow's sugya, but we're going to get into that. But that's the point. In other words, you shouldn't think that this halakha somehow is limited to Shabbos. There also there's a concept of milsa agav orche mashma. Sometimes the Mishnah teaches us like two halachas in one. So here it's teaching me that the window for annulment is a day, a calendar day, and it's also teaching me that what? That you could annul nedarim when? On Shabbos Kodesh also. Fine. So we'll say, so let's go. So let's go back to tomorrow. So we'll say, what are we introduced to? We're introduced now into the window of annulment. So the window of annulment ultimately is a calendar day. Sometimes that gives the husband or the father a lot of time. Sometimes it only gives them a little bit of time. But that is the halacha. Says the Gemara Tanya. Here we go. Hafaras nedarim kol hayom. So we'll say hafaras nedarim is the entire day. Once again, what does entire day mean? Entire day means calendar day. Calendar day. So Rabbi Yossi bar Yehuda, Rabbi Elazar bar Rabbi Shimon Amru me'es leis. Wow. Okay, here we have it. Shabbos say Tanakama comes hold that halacha ma'isa, the window for annulment is a calendar day. Shabbos say just to understand in halacha in general, when you see the word yom, a day, unqualified yom means a calendar day. When Chazal want to talk about a 24-hour period, the lashon is me'es leis. Me'es leis. So Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Yehuda, and Rabbi Elazar and Shimon come along and they say, no. The window for annulment of a neder is 24 hours. So let's analyze. So my time with the Tanakama, why does the Tanakama hold that you have a calendar day? Amar Kra, because the pasuk says, Biyom Shamo. They will say, the Torah itself says, Biyom Shamo. They will say, like we just said before, unqualified Yom means what? A calendar day. Take a quick look at the Ran for just a moment. It will say in the widest lines of the Ran, 3 lines in Amakra B'Yom Shamo, Demashma Yom Hashmiya Bilvad. So the Ran is saying unqualified Yom means a calendar day. So the Torah says husband, father have their or husband. In this case, it's the husband. So it's the husband over here. So right, the husband has the power of annulment B'Yom on the day that he hears it. What's the day that he hears it? Calendar day. V'Rabbanan my time. I say, what's the Rabbanan's logic? What's Tanakh, right? V'Rabbanan my time. I was like, when it says Rabbanan over, it means the rabbis, Rabbi Yossi and Rabbi Elazar. What's their logic? T'chsiv miyom el yom. Rabbi Elazar said that same pasuk says from one day to the next. So Rabbi Yossi and Rabbi Elazar are understanding miyom el yom to mean what? 24 hours. Me'is leis. So both say. So by the way, it's fascinating. It's the same. I just want to point out, it's the same pasuk. It's the same pasuk. So the Tanakama is focusing on Biyom Shamo, calendar day. Rabbi Yossi and Rabbi Lazar are focusing on Miyom El Yom. And they're using that to mean 24 hours. So let's analyze. The Tanakama hoksiv Miyom El Yom. What does the Tanakama do with the phrase Miyom El Yom? It's trich. That's needed. Why? Di'i Biyom Shamo Hava Amina Biyamama in Balayla Lo. Supposed to listen to this. Tanakama says, no. You need Miyom El Yom. Why need Miyom El Yom? Shabbos say, here's what's interesting. Tanakama says, to a certain degree, I agree that Miyom El Yom could span a larger amount of time than a calendar day. But it's not coming to teach you 24 hours. What is it coming to teach you? It's coming to teach you that you could even do Hafaras Nedarim at night. At night. So the Gemara said, I'm sorry. Otanakama haksiv miyom yom. It's terich di'i biyom shamo. Because if it would have just said biyom shamo, hava amina, I would have thought that when can a husband annul his wife's nedarim? Biyamama in balayla lo. By day, yes, but not by night. Because biyom shamo ksiv miyom yom. Therefore, the Torah says miyom yom to teach you that what? That you could even go ahead and halacha lemaisa annul nidarim at night. Oh, Sarah will say, so just pause here for just a moment. So according to Tanakama, the core halacha of the time frame of hafara is taught to us from where? Biyom Shamo. Biyom Shamo teaches us that halacha lemaisa, a calendar day. A calendar day. Fine. What does Miyom El Yom teach me? That you could even do hafaras nidarim at night. At night, good. Ulamandar miyom el yom. But according to Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Yossi, who hold 24-hour period miyom el yom, what do they do with biyom shamo? It's trich. It's necessary. I'll tell you why. Diksiv miyom el yom. If we would have just said miyom el yom, havamina mechad b'shaba lechad b'shaba. This is wild. Rabbi say, listen to this. They say like this. Leiferba. If it would have just said miyom el yom, I will say, you know what I would have thought? This is wild. I would have thought, what's the window for Afara? What's the window? A week. Miyom El Yom. She made the neder on a Monday, right? What's the window of Hafara? From one Monday to what? To what? To the next Monday. A week. Therefore, Ksiv Biyom Shamo. Therefore, we'll say, so here's what's interesting. According to Rabbi Elazar and Rabbi Yossi, so listen to this. Miyom El Yom, ultimately would have taught me 1 week to the next, Monday to Monday. Biyom Shamo comes to kind of constrict Miyom Yom to teach you that it's a 24-hour period, not a 1 week period. Incredible. So we'll say, here's what we're left with. A fundamental machlokes, really fascinating, fundamental machlokes between the Tanakama and between Rabbi Yossi and Rabbi Eliezer. In other words, Tanakama is saying on one hand, the window for annulment is 1 calendar day. He learns it out from Biyom Shamo, and Miyom El Yom teaches me that you could even do annulment at night. Rabbi Eliezer, Rabbi Yossi is saying the window for annulment is a 24-hour period. And the Yom El Yom, I would have thought it meant the week. Biyom Shamo limits it to 1 24-hour period. Incredible. So we'll say, what's the halacha? What's the halacha? Amar Shimon Pazi, Amar Rabbi Shimon Levi, Ein halacha ka'oso hazog. So also Rabbi Shimon ben Pazi says in Rabbi Shimon Levi, the halacha does not follow this pair of rabbis. Which pair of rabbis? Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Huda, and Rabbi Lazar ben Rabbi Shimon. Right? The halacha does not follow this pair of rabbis, namely that the window for annulment is 1 calendar day. 1 calendar day. Levi savar leme ave kahani tanoi. So Levi was going to conduct himself like these rabbis, like Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Yossi, and annul a neder past the calendar day within a 24-hour period. Amar le Rabbi, Amar le Rav, Hachi Amar Chavivi. Rav said Chavivi. Rabbi say, if you look at Rashi over here, who's Chavivi? Rav said Chavivi. Who's Chavivi? 4 lines are from the bottom. Chavivi, Rabbi Chia. Chavivi refers to Rabbi Chia. Why? Who's Chabibi? Shahaya Dodo Shorav. I will say Chabibi is another name for uncle. So Rabbi Chia was Rav's uncle. So Rav says to Levi, my uncle already said, Ein halacha ka'osa hazug, that the halacha does not follow that pair of rabbis, namely that the window for annulment ultimately is going to be what? A calendar day and not 24 hours. So I'll say, so how do we paskin? This is obviously incredibly important. So how do we paskin? So the Rambam in Hilchos Nedarim, Halach Perek Yud Beis, Halacha Tesvav says as follows. Here we go. So he says, Hafaras Nedarim Kol Hayom Ve'ena Me'es Le'es. All right, so it's interesting how the Rambam phrases it, right? He says, annulment of a neder by a father or a husband is for the calendar day, but is not for a full 24-hour period. So he goes on, he says, Ketzad, Nadra b'tchilas l'alshini, ari meifra kol os alei chol yom hasheni. Okay, so that's interesting. I don't know why the Rambam then goes through all the cases. But Allah Chalamaysa, he passed like the Tanakama, namely that the window for annulment of a neder by a husband or by a father, by a husband or by a father, right? Ultimately, again, it's for the calendar day, right? One calendar day. And I will say, as the Mishnah says, sometimes that gives him a lot of time. Sometimes that gives him a little bit of time. Everything depending on when he hears the neder. Good. So that's the end of that sugya. Now we'll say, we're going to do something fascinating. Listen to this. So we'll say, so here's what we have. This is very exciting. So here's what we have. We now have become incredibly proficient in the two models of neder revocation. So know that there's hataras nadarim. Now we'll say, how do you do hataras nadarim? Who do you need for hataras nadarim? Who do you need? A chacham. Right? A beis din, or at least a chacham, talmid chacham. I will say, what are the mechanics of hataras nadarim? What do you need? What do you need? A Pesach. The most simple form of Pesach is charata. Excellent. Charata. Right? So contrast that with hafara. Who does hafara? Father or husband. What do you need for hafara? A husband or a father. Right? That's all. In other words, I will say, because remember, what's the difference? It's a fundamental difference. The process of hatara is driven by who? The vower. The process of hafara is driven by who? Husband or the father. Right? So it makes sense. Therefore, again, the process of hafara is something the husband or the father is doing. Therefore, again, the vower doesn't really have a part in this. Right? Remember, I will say, you could have a case of a woman who made a neder, and she wants it. Obviously, she made it. So she wants the neder. Husband says, I don't want it. So let's say, so he has the power of revocation even over her protestation. Right? Excellent, right? Power of revocation even over a protestation. I will say, as opposed to, let's say, charata, as opposed to, I should say, hatara, where halacha l'maisa, again, in that case, halacha l'maisa, if the vower does initiate the process, so now watch this. So now, the ikar for hatara is going to be charata. Here we go, I will say. So this is very interesting. So, chia barav, shari gira ubadik. This is great. So I will say, literal translation was, Chia Barav would be shooting arrows and at the same time would go ahead and help someone annul their neder. Okay, what does that mean? Take a look at the Ran. 3 lines are from the bottom. 3 lines are from the bottom. Chia Barav shadi giro badik agav grara derav maisiyacha hadchia barav. So I'll say, by the way, why is this being brought down here? Because remember again, Levi wanted to conduct himself like Rabbi Yossi and Rabbi Eliezer and use a 24-hour window for neder annulment. Rav said, my uncle Rabbi Chia, said you can't do that. That's not how we paskin. Once we quoted Rabbi Chia, we're bringing up Rabbi Chia again over here. So look at the Ran. Listen to this. He says, Rav Shadi, right? So I'm sorry. Hachadchia barav Shadi gira ubadik. Ba'od shahayim isasik liros chitzim. Haya bodek adam haba lefanav lahatir nidro v'shalo im mischaret umatiro v'kasaver poschin becharata. We'll say, here we go. Rabbi Chia felt as follows. Rabbi Chia felt the only Pesach you need to be matir a neder is what? Charata. They will say, what does charata consist of? I regret having made the neder. That's it. So I will say, essentially what the Gemara is saying is like this. According to Rabbi Chia, the only thing you need for hataras nadarim is charata. The only thing you need for charata is an actual expression of remorse. It does not require a deep involved process. The vower just has to show up before a chacham and say, I regret having made the neder. And the chacham says, okay, right? And that's it. In other words, right? And it's, right? Mutalach. That's it. So because it's not an involved process, what the Gemara essentially is, what does it mean Rabbi Chia was shooting arrows? What it means is, Rabbi Chia was doing something else, right? He was, what's the word? Do multiple things at the same time? Multitasking. But he was multitasking. So he's shooting arrows, and I guess some people get in their steps, some people get in their arrows, whatever it is, right? So Lamaisa again, he's shooting arrows, and he's being matir nedarim, right? That's it. The point I will say is, he felt the only thing you need for hataras nedarim is simple charata. So because all it requires is simple remorse on the part of the vower, it's not an involved process. And because it's not an involved process, you could even be multitasking. Similarly, the Gemara says, Rabba Barafuna Yasivikayim. So I'll say similarly again, Rabba Barafuna sometimes would sit and sometimes would stand when he was being matir neder. It's the same idea, I will say. Remember again, when you need to deal with something that requires a bit more concentration, what do? You sit. Standing, generally, people have less concentration. So the idea is, how would Rabba Rafuna be matir neder? Sitting or standing. Look at the last round on the page. So if you caught him sitting, he'd be sitting. If you caught him standing, he'd be standing. It's the same idea. Both of these great rabbanim felt that the only thing you need for hataras nedarim is simple charata. Charata is not an involved process. It's just the vower simply saying, I regret ever having made this neder. It doesn't get into a Pesach, it doesn't get into, it's just simple remorse. Simple remorse, therefore, didn't require the concentration of these great rabbanim, and they were matir nedarim with relative ease, even while multitasking. I will say, we'll stop over here for today. In Meretz Hashem, we're going to jump back to the Mishnah regarding Shabbos. In Meretz Hashem tomorrow. Shkoyach. All right, have a great day, everyone.